On December 10th, 2019, there was a philosophy roundtable on the subject of antinatalism and procreation ethics at the Lurie Biomedical Engineering Building on the University of Michigan's North Campus in Ann Arbor. It's easy to find on Google Maps because it's right across from the Gerald "Pardon Me" Ford Presidential Library. He's the only U.S. president from Michigan, and he went to school here. So if you were to write a book about Watergate, then you might come here to look through his presidential papers. I looked it up, and the pardon of Nixon signed by Gerald Ford is actually archived in Washington, D.C. Too bad, because it's one of the only things I would like to see, kind of like Al Capone's tax returns. It's a famous artifact in the history of American crime. Gerald Ford was an unelected crook, yet he's the kind of person that they build museums and statues in tribute to. But I digress. This roundtable was part of a continuing series of bioethical discussions put on by lecturer Barry Belmont. His mission statement reads, "The world could stand to think a little bit more about itself and where it's heading. We have a brilliant generation of engineers coming up, and they've got ideas about how they want the world to look, and they want the skills to make it look that way. We've got to equip them with these and many others, and I think I can help." So I applaud him for having these discussions, and it gave me the opportunity to educate some young people on antinatalist ethics in person. This was the first time that I had the chance to do this in the wild, so it was a new experience for me. I thought it went pretty well. These are engineering students, so they're educated and curious. I was disappointed right when I walked in that everyone was eating cheese pizza at an ethics talk, and someone even bizarrely asked me, "What's wrong with cheese?" I'm sorry I missed the animal rights roundtable that took place in 2018. That would have been a good one for me to go to, and maybe this wouldn't have happened. There were around 15 to 20 people in attendance. As I said, it was mostly engineering students, but not all of them were. I was glad that I wasn't the oldest one there. One man ironically brought his son to expose him to philosophy, so I do give him kudos for that, although he was unsurprisingly resistant to my arguments. The discussion lasted 2.5 hours. The moderator did get everyone's consent to be recorded before it began for his own archive, so I also recorded it and will post a few clips in this video, but we'll take out any personal information like names and such. Beaumont started the discussion by asking an interesting question. Who are you, and why were you born? You could see that everyone was trying to get inside their parents' heads and come up with a reason. Common answers were, my parents wanted to try for a boy this time, and my parents wanted my brother to have a sibling. Supposedly that's why my parents had my brother. This is what I said.
I don't know if I'm the only antinatalist activist who showed up here, but I came into existence because my parents wanted to satisfy their own selfish desires. They didn't really care that, what misfortune I was going to be involved in. They did it for themselves, not for me. I make antinatalist themed artwork, and I have an antinatalist YouTube channel called Life Sucks. And I promote antinatalism on that channel, and I come at it from the negative utilitarian perspective. So to me, standard utilitarianism values happiness, which to me is just a term that doesn't really mean anything when you compare it to suffering. So all my ethics are suffering focused. The only value in the universe to me is suffering. Life to me is just a replicating molecule with no purpose. And there's a horrific price that we pay for bringing life into existence. To put someone into this dangerous world on purpose where they'll be tortured and killed, to me is essentially the same thing as committing an act of premeditated murder. And it's my opinion that this is one of the most important subjects we could possibly discuss, so that's why I'm here today.
As you can tell from my opening statement, I was mostly going to use Ephesus arguments in addition to Benatar's. The first order of business was to suss out what antinatalism is and means. So we had to discuss if the problem is human procreation, or is the problem sentience. The moderator had a lot of quotes from Zapfa's The Last Messiah, which is a very human-centered essay. So I'm not surprised that devotees of Zapfa don't seem to be animal rights activists as much as Ephesus or Benatarians.
It's interesting you brought up animals. I wasn't even thinking about that because, if it's basically your argument is essentially, I don't have consent to exist.
Yeah.
You're never asked. Neither do any other animals. So is it essentially immoral for life to exist in the first place?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's the problem I have with Zapfa's essay, The Last Messiah, is that it's so human-centric. Who cares about humans when animals have been here for 500 million years, killing each other, ripping each other's faces off? We've only been here for really we've only had culture for 10,000 years. Maybe I think 200,000 years humans have existed. I mean, that's nothing compared to what animals have experienced. So to me, antinatalism, and sometimes this philosophy that applies to animals is called ethilism, which is life spelled backwards. It's all about life. Life is a negative, not just human life or the ethics of creating humans. Animals don't know any better. That's the problem. Humans do. So animals don't have a choice. There is no ethics there. But if they did know, hopefully they would come to the conclusion this is wrong.
Would it be worthwhile for humanity to last long enough to sterilize all other life?
Absolutely. That's like the only reason for us to continue to exist, in my opinion.
Is to be the stewards of life's extinction.
Yeah, sometimes it's called the graceful exit.
Okay.
So we'd have to keep a few humans around so we can make sure all the animal life can go extinct, as peacefully and painlessly as possible, and then we can turn the lights out.
I don't really like that extinction got brought up so quickly because people become fixated on it. I mean, it is the end goal of antinatalism and ethilism, but I feel like we do have to kind of nudge people a little bit more slowly into accepting extinction, and it's probably best to start out with arguments against human procreation first. However, I do realize that people are going to reach the logical conclusion themselves pretty fast and bring it up anyways. Maybe it's better to get it out of the way. So then the moderator asks the question,
Why do you suppose folks who have the capability of doing that, current presidents, czars of Russia, haven't done that?
To destroy the planet.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they're all natalists pretty much. This philosophy is kind of new, really. And, it's something that we should really come together and, starting small, but come to a consensus. And it'd be great if everyone could get on board. I mean, because speaking of consent, there's this thing called this thought experiment called the red button experiment, or thought experiment, and it's if you could press a red button and destroy the planet painlessly, would you do it? And of course, my answer would be yes. I would do it without hesitation. But I would be violating everyone's consent on Earth who wants to continue to exist, including all the animals. They don't know; they might want to keep living. So that is a problem. And of course, the other problem is a nuclear disaster could bring about great misfortune and pain and suffering. So we want to do it in the most ethical way possible.
I'm curious, when you mentioned consent, I did not consent to exist. I suppose neither did any of us. Yet, if you ask me now if I post event consent,
Right.
I would say yes, I am happy to be alive. I would rather to have been alive than not to have existed at all.
Yeah, it's because life is addictive.
I guess I'm happy to be addicted.
All right, says the person who doesn't have cancer.
Yes.
All right.
I'm in a privileged position to say that.
Right.
But my point is that a lot of people can say that.
Oh yeah, but the question is it ethical for you to impose life on someone else, even though they might have a terrible life?
You don't really know if we'll have a bad or a good life.
That's right.
Though.
It's true.
What if let's imagine someone had a horrible childhood, so they want to have kids to give that child a good childhood.
Right.
Is that still unethical in your opinion?
Yes, 'cause
they're thinking about doing good.
Right, because that kid could have cancer, that kid could get AIDS, that kid get run over. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of things that could go wrong, and so few things that could go right.
What level of certainty would you need? I don't know. There's a lot of actions we do every day that we don't know what the effect will be because you just can't predict into the future.
Right.
So how is it fair, or not fair, but make sense to say because you can't know what will happen, you can't do that because there might be a lot of stuff you could apply that to.
Right, but the overwhelming odds are that it's going to be a negative outcome. I mean, everyone dies, 100% guarantee, and death is usually seen as a bad thing.
Is there no concept to the antinatalist of the good death?
What would be an example of that?
The death one greets as an old friend, the one we're all striving towards, right? Not to meet our ends as enemies or foes, but as inevitable coming togethers, right? Is there a way one could die peacefully?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I hope that it happens to all of you, and hope I also have. I also have
What
a
a
peaceful
thing to
death.
wish on this
Yeah.
holiday season.
Then the moderator polled the room about who would want to live forever, and not shockingly, many of them think that they would like that. This is one of the points where the discussion goes out into the weeds a bit, so I'll just skip ahead. Reasons why people think that they would want to jack off for thousands of years isn't very interesting. At least someone did bring up boredom and the fact that if you live long enough and see everyone and everything you loved be destroyed, immortality would be a curse. At this point, the moderator asked me a question that always seems to come up, aliens, and then it basically became an Ask the Antinatalist show, which I don't mind because this is what I was there for.
Actually, this allows me, sorry, I have to. He brings up space travel. I have to ask our resident antinatalist. If we found life on other worlds, should we snuff it out?
Well, it's never going to happen, for one thing.
Why is that? Oh, we can get into that, but
Yeah,
never
well,
gonna
we know
happen.
abiogenesis only occurred once in the whole history of the universe that we know of. So all of us,
Yeah, we don't know much, right?
well, every plant, every animal, we all descended from that same bacteria that only replicated once. So life is more rare, I think, than anyone gives it credit for. We haven't found it on any other planets in the solar system. We can't reach other solar systems. So the only way we could discover them, of course, was through their radar or their radio waves or anything. But it's impossible right now for us to reach them. So there's nothing we can do.
What if it's something as simple as bacteria on Mars? You know, just under the under the frost, little teeny tiny microorganisms.
Yeah, the only problem would be that's not sentient, so who cares? But could it evolve into something sentient? Then that'd be a problem. Because people say that, like with the red button scenario. Okay, say we nuke the planet on all the different fault lines, cause global catastrophe, kill all sentient life. What if the bacteria survives? In the next 4 billion years that the planet could be, or actually the Earth will probably, the atmosphere will probably be burned off in about 1.5 billion years. But could in that time life come back? I don't think it could. Because I think abiogenesis, however it happened, was incredibly rare.
So I gave Inmendum's standard reply to this argument, that life is more rare than most people suspect, and intelligent life, as far as we know, only exists on Earth. Then it got bogged down into how far radio waves can actually go and how accurate is the Drake equation, etc. Sticking around so that we can help some species that is more advanced than us go extinct is one of the harder to swallow natalist arguments. So then a student asked me an interesting question about how does someone become an antinatalist and why aren't there more of us?
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Why have you been able to attain this enlightenment, but most people don't share this?
Well, that's
belief, if this is
what Zaffa was talking about is delusion. Like I was saying to him, life is addictive. You don't really know why you love it.
Let me rephrase it. How were you able to break free?
Oh, I guess I've always been kind of a depressive realist. And then when I was, 12, I became an atheist, so I didn't believe in that delusion. I got that out of the way, so that helped. And then I got into something I look forward maybe to coming to the next time you're going to talk about overpopulation ethics and stuff, I think. And that kind of led me in antinatalism. I thought, well, this is stupid to bring someone into the world when there's too many people. And then that kind of led me to think, well, what other reasons? And then I discovered the ethics of it.
So it took about a half an hour into the discussion, but the question every antinatalist gets at some point came up. It's almost guaranteed.
I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but given your stance, why are you still alive?
That's one of the most common things that antinatalists get is, why don't you just kill yourself? Well, of course, death is a harm. I don't want to hurt myself. I'm scared of dying. I have a wife, I have 4 dogs, I have a mother with Parkinson's disease I have to take care of, I have responsibilities. And also, I can't participate in antinatalism or veganism. I can't get people to stop eating cheese pizza and stop having kids if I'm dead. So to me, that's a good reason to keep going.
Why can't we eat cheese pizza?
It's immoral and unethical.
So it's not just that the current human condition is undesirable. You'd go so far as to say there is no conscious state that is worth trying to.
Yeah, life is just a tragic accident. We should get rid of it. So I think
life or consciousness, just.
Okay, yes. Well, life, but I know we're talking about consciousness. I think but consciousness can be good, and especially for the animals, because we can be the bus driver, the good bus driver, and steer this thing into a graceful exit. So that way, it's a damn good thing we have it.
To the extent that we don't do that, and to the extent that you or anyone else would hold us morally culpable of what consequences there, like what comes of the fact that we aren't currently shepherds of Armageddon.
Oh, what comes of that?
Yeah.
Just, billions more years of suffering.
I just have a question. I just want to know more about the line of reasoning.
Sure.
So what makes it so that essentially living is suffering? Could you just expand on that?
Just because of unfulfilled desires. So there is no...
Or possibly consider question number 7.
Yeah.
I guess we're all going to read it. Okay.
Okay.
Benedar posits an inherent asymmetry, and perhaps this is where you're going to go with it, to the presence of pain in existence, on the whole not a great thing, and the absence of suffering in non-existence, on the whole generally a good thing. So this is this asymmetry where non-existence is necessarily full of less suffering than coming out of existence.
Yeah, I just don't believe there's any positive in life. It's only negative. So like right now I'm feeling
this conversation. I don't think this is
well, we're trying to fix the problem, and the problem is greater. So like I'm thirsty right now. You may think you're getting some pleasure by drinking some water, but really you're just trying to mitigate a pain. So you bring something into existence. They're just basically going to have all these unfulfilled desires that you're going to just need to try and fulfill them. There isn't anything.
Can I just push back a little on that? The pain that you might associate with thirst in its typical sense, as we have it in a developed world, cannot in any way be what you would put in this same category as suffering, is it?
Yeah, it's suffering, especially if it's
is
minor.
that not to dilute the word suffering of?
Well, take that away from me for 24 hours.
Sure, but that's not what you mean by thirst in the normal, typical sense that everyone in this room experiences. I'm trying to say, like, I'm thirsty right now. I want to take a drink. I would never in any way associate that with suffering. Would you?
Yeah. You're only drinking because you have a desire to drink.
Sure, but I don't believe it's because I desire not to suffer.
The moderator was the one who pushed back against me a bit this time. This is the whole pinprick thing that Superhuman Dance and Inmendum have to argue about time and time again. Is a minor pinprick suffering? And my understanding is that yes, any discomfort is suffering. It's something that needs fixing. Again, I wish I could have explained this better. Like when one guy said, well, I can drink water even if I'm not thirsty. Then I should have said, well, that's because you're bored, and boredom is suffering whether you accept it or not. The moderator then gets into the transhumanist argument, one that I have addressed a few times on this channel.
So there's a branch of negative utilitarianism called transhumanism. If you ever heard of David Pearce, he's kind of the big guy. He's a British philosopher.
David Hyde Pierce, actor from the 90s sitcom Frasier, yes.
Another guy, I think, but for one thing, it's not technically possible yet, and there's no reason to say why that would be better than non-existence. It would be yeah. It's a better future for us for sure, and for the animals. Not against it. I just think it's as good as non-existence.
I cut out a big chunk here of the discussion because it wasn't relevant, and any time the discussion got into movies or culture, it took away from the main point. We talked a little bit about punishment ethics, and again, that wasn't the subject.
Because I think of life sometimes as probably one of the greatest gambles in just everything. Because you may be born into a wealthy family, never had to really care about all suffering, all that stuff, do whatever the heck you want. Or you may be born into the shittiest situation in the world where you face constant suffering for millennia, who knows. But in the end of the day, it's just a gamble. So why don't I just be born, take a gamble? If life sucks, I'll just opt out, and I'll spend the rest. I'm still gonna spend the rest of my life, or the rest of my non-life, just as nothing, or maybe in a sensory deprivation tank, essentially, kind of situation. So, what's the harm if I'm comparing just 100 years of a chance of maybe some hope or something good versus, and either way, I'm going to be returning to this eternity of non-existence.
It seems like you took the asymmetry argument and you did it exactly the other way, and I disagree with it just as much this way.
All right.
I don't know, because as I understood it, the antinatalist asymmetry was why would you bring something into existence when there's a risk of it suffering? In short, because the pleasure which might happen is it doesn't matter. But
I think my sense is like there were.
Seems like you just turned that around. You said this suffering doesn't matter. Why not just shoot for the off chance of having a good time?
Yeah, but are we basically saying that it'd be okay to have a kid because they can just kill themselves?
I'd say it'd be okay to have a kid because we're all gonna die either way. Like, literally, we all will return to like ashes or nothing or whatever. And if there's even the whole idea of like 1%, like a 0.001% chance of like something amazing happen, even if like that, let's just say that was not even the case. Like, why not just live for the heck of it? Just like maybe.
Well, I mean, just imagine.
Or just trying to leave the Earth in a better position so that way the next folks that occupy it have, you know, instead of a 0.001% chance of having something great happen, maybe they have a 0.002, and then they can turn
like
that into a 0.004.
That's one way to put it.
Actually, I mean, I know you were being glib, but is there not something to the notion that it is actually okay to condemn someone to life, to throw them into existence, given that they do have this ripcord, the ability to get out of it? It's unlike other prisons in that sense.
Well, the unfortunate thing, and I was going to bring this up during the prison thing, there is no right to die in this country, really. There's
at least 7 states that have it.
If you have,
only, right?
I think.
Well, it's mostly relegated to terminally ill.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, I think Oregon's one of the states, but
Sorry, my bad.
You have to have inoperable brain cancer and be in like stage 4 right before you die.
It's a pretty high burden.
Yeah, and I mean, if you have a right to die, I mean, the only thing that would help your argument a little bit is if you could go to a suicide booth or whatever and put in a quarter and you're nothing. But we don't have anything like that. Any way to help someone who wants out.
We have pharmacies, we have cliffs, we have tall buildings, we have cars.
We have the internet, the dark web.
But you would tell your kid, hey, there's a building, go for it. Don't you see there's a little bit of an ethical problem with that?
Well, and I think there's a bit of coercion on your part as a figure of authority saying, you can do exactly what I'm telling you to do, or there's always a building.
But why bring that pain into existence? Like, killing yourself is a very traumatic thing to do, and why, when they don't have to exist in the first place, why even take that chance?
Going towards like minimalizing like suffering, right? Like
yes, it's very much so.
You don't get to commit suicide like in a vacuum. That was right. It's great to have these thought experiments in which you do, and you can just pull the cord, and no one is around you is ever affected. But like, it doesn't have to even be like the people nearest and dearest to you who have to deal with your suffering, right? It's like if you throw yourself off a cliff or you throw yourself off a building, right? They're just the other people
littering
are like strangers who have to deal with the fact that you did that, and that's right, and it's traumatic to you, and it's traumatic to everyone who witnesses it, both like in the real life witnesses it and the ripple effects out there. So it's like, yeah, I guess in theory, like, oh, you can put someone into existence because, like, yeah, they have the choice to pull themselves out of it, but you don't get to do that without ripple affecting everyone around you in a drastically negative way.
So they made a good point to the glibite that suicide doesn't just affect the person who kills himself. Look at Jaiwen Huang and how his death sent a ripple through the antinatalist community, and of course he had friends and family as well. I also like that the moderator called his comment glib, which it was.
In fact, you had mentioned a one-child policy, and I posed, do you have a right to have a child? If we consider Ruley's argument, question number 12, concludes the best reason to procreate, she considers all these arguments, is in order to experience the parent-child relationship, is what she had said is sort of the best possible reason for procreation. But adoption offers a viable and worthwhile alternative to procreation for those who want to parent. Adopting an already existing child does not make one complicit in the potential harms of procreation, nor does it add a new person to an overpopulated world. Instead of, if someone wanted to have a child in that case, must they be required to adopt first before making a new one? Would that be sensible? Would that be disagreeable? Does someone have a right to have a child?
Back to the question of, do you have a right to have a child? And now I'm thinking, yes, because it's the independence of your body, right? Like, saying no, you don't have the right to have a child is saying no, you don't get to do with your body as you please.
Right, but
it's the sort of same, right? It's
but you are using your body to hurt someone else, because bringing someone into existence, you're harming them.
Okay. No, how about no? I disagree.
I mean, that's
But you
bring
aren't
someone to
killing
existence
them,
to
right?
die. Yes, you
Who is
are.
actually killing
Okay,
their
so
child?
so if someone murders my non-existent child, it'd still be my fault because
Probably
I
not,
set
though,
up the murder to happen.
Yeah, and someone forged the bullet, right? There's culpability all over, but I think it's probably the murderer most at, if we're sticking someone in jail.
Well, I mean, when you have a child, they're going to die, so it's going to happen someday. So. The moderator challenged my argument that procreation is the equivalent of murdering someone, and so-called accidental births are included because failing to get an abortion is letting the murder happen. That is, if abortion is available, of course. The moderator compares my claim with the idea of blaming the person who manufactured a bullet for a crime where the bullet is used to kill someone. There is an unethical practice called war profiteering, which is a real thing, and companies like Raytheon are culpable for the harm their weapons cause. But that comparison doesn't really work here because a manufacturer of bullets doesn't know the fate of the bullet. Yes, they know they are designed to kill, but they can also be used for target practice. Bullets are very useful for stopping crime, for killing intruders, for saving lives. A parent knows without any shadow of a doubt that they are imposing a death sentence on someone. So I think it would have made more sense for him to compare procreation to an arms manufacturer who makes a bullet specifically for a hired assassin with a specific target in mind. And if he really wants to compare it to procreation, the victim's only crime would be to just be born. Obviously, that's not deserving of the death penalty.
So what are the actual odds of getting consensus of antinatalism from those?
Hey, I get that question a lot. I mean, people are coming around to it more, just like we've seen veganism increase a lot over the the past even just 5 years. People are becoming more aware of climate change, that kind of thing, and recycling more. And so it's hard to say. I mean, I'd like to hope that more people. I mean, if I can just stop one person from having a kid, I think that I will have done something good.
But it seems
there
like if
pyramid
you're
scheme involved?
antinatalist and then you die, like every antinatalist needs to go out there and convert a bunch of people, or else they all die, and then everyone's like, "What the hell was that?"
Right, but luckily,
that was a weird blip in history. Let's go have some kids,
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, see, that's one of the worst.
The suburbs with me.
That's just one of the worst arguments I've heard for natalism is, I want my kid to be a Christian or a Muslim or whatever. They want their philosophy to live on, but philosophy is not inherited. You can teach someone a philosophy, so I don't need to have kids to pass on antinatalism.
But I mean, so there is like even if you're like more than anti-natalist, even if you're like anti being alive, like if you think that you would be better off to simply die right now, I don't know whether or not you think that, but there's still possibly like altruistic reason for you to continue on so that you can cut short other people's lives.
Well, make sure lives never
Prevent
come into
other people,
existence. And that philosophy is called promortalism. The idea that it's better to die sooner than later.
Sorry, promortalism.
Yeah, the idea that it's better to die sooner than later. Like, it would be better for me to die right now, because I won't suffer anymore.
And why are they ridiculously wrong?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said earlier, that would hurt my wife immensely, my mother and my dogs and all that kind of stuff. And I couldn't convert anyone to veganism or anything. So.
But when you think about the alternative of having to drive home from Ann Arbor in this weather,
I know it's gonna suck. Yeah.
Wait, were we just talking of like almost getting to the point of like, by nature, antinatalism almost sort of evolutionarily cuts itself out? Because unless there's this sort of threshold, I'm sure you could come up with some differential equation and figure it out.
But you don't even have to. You're getting all fancy with it. You're just saying, of course, anything that's evolved to live, where the game of life is not going.
Right. But then there's some threshold where every antinatalist must spread their ideology to others for it to continue existing until the end of the species.
So the question was, will there ever be a consensus on antinatalism? In other words, will a majority come around to the idea? Of course, it won't require a majority, and as Inmendum says, the most civilized countries are already in negative birth rate territory, So you could say some nations are already experiencing an antinatalist culture, even if they don't consciously know it. So as you just heard, some of them fell into the trap of thinking that philosophy is somehow inherited. I don't really understand this argument because just one antinatalist like Inmendham or David Benatar could potentially spread the position into the future all by themselves. Not every antinatalist needs to be an outspoken activist. Or through logic, people can come to the conclusion themselves quite easily.
Question number 10. Emil Saron begins The Trouble with Being Born, this fine little tome right here. 3 in the morning, I realize this second, then this one, then the next. I draw up the balance sheet for each minute, and why all this? Because I was born. It is a special type of sleeplessness that produces the indictment of birth. And with this I ask, why might bouts of insomnia cause us to question our birth? Why might we question our existence or the existence of others when depressed and not when triumphant? That is, why do we consider, why am I here? To be or not to be, only when we're sad.
The moderator then reads question 10, which deals with Emil Cioran, and the idea that we contemplate the shittiness of life more when we can't sleep. I think that the answer to this is obvious, because sleeplessness is a common form of suffering, and suffering makes one more aware of how intrinsically life sucks. But let's listen to what people had to say.
I feel like I do literally feel thankful for existence, like when I feel something great and wonderful. Like I don't know.
I think it's fair to say that when people are depressed, they think about whether they want to be here at all a lot more than when they're happy. Like that's pretty. I don't think that's very controversial or far from true. I think that's kind of like a fact. Yeah, I mean, like it's fair. It's worth questioning, but.
I mean, I'll admit that the fact that I'm a depressive realist. I mean, I've been on lithium, I've been on Prozac, I've been on Paxil, I've been on a few other drugs. And that does, I'm sure that had something to do with it, but although I hate it when people use that argument against me and say, oh, well, only depressives, are antinatalists, but I think that just gave me insight.
The conversation was wrapping up here around the 2-hour mark, but then one of the glib people tried to make a utilitarian case for natalism.
Yeah, I just don't find that convincing. I mean, like, what are we going to do? Like, put slaughterhouses and McDonald's on Mars? I mean, what the fuck are we doing? We're not doing anything important. The only thing we can do is prevent suffering, in my opinion. So, I mean, there's no way to reach aliens, so just forget about that. So, what can we do here? And we can just, prevent more pain and death and suffering for the next billion years. And that's what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned that, like, the human race does go extinct, and then the animals just keep on killing each other for another 1.5 billion years. That seems like the worst thing.
So, yeah, that brings up the curious point of, like, how far do we go in imposing this? How far?
Yeah, I mean,
suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I was saying. Like, I don't know if we should just force people to not have kids, but we can do some things like, just incentivize having less kids. Mm-hmm. Like, well, you're going to pay more taxes if you have more kids. You're not going to get more entitlements, that kind of thing.
Oh, but yeah.
Start small.
The animals, though, it seems like if we
Yeah.
are taking the premise that life is bad, we should at least continue to exist long enough to be able to sterilize.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we should stay around. Like, we could start in the oceans or something. I've heard different plans about this, like taking care of predatory species first. Because they cause so much harm to the herbivores and stuff. Yeah, I think that's a good goal.
Then someone makes the claim that it may be unethical to infringe upon wild animals in any way, and this is basically the vehement or the vegan environmentalist conservationist perspective.
The animals are consenting to be antinatalist, is all I'm going to say. So,
It's
following
true.
like your frame of logic, I'd say it's probably, even if I agreed with your frame of logic, I'd kind of say it's probably still immoral to get rid of, or to sterilize the animals, because they're not consenting.
But is it
They
moral?
can't.
Is it moral to let them rip each other's faces off?
Yeah, like there's a non-aggression principle thing where they're causing harm to others or their future offspring.
Yeah, well, a
I mean,
philosopher.
then you're sort of considering it from their point of view, whereas I would say you directly taking the action of sterilizing them is something that you've done upon yourself,
Is
that
it
you've
something
taken that
about
choice.
letting them rip each other's faces off versus doing something to them.
Right, you can't just
Is that
let this happen. And
Why not? I mean, because
it's
whether or not
horror,
you
it's horror.
happen to exist or not, that was going to happen without you, so it's definitely not your fault or responsibility or burden.
So a philosopher, like, his name's Inmendham, he's on YouTube, and he has the good bus driver metaphor. I mean, like, do you want to just let a bus just drive all over the fucking place with no driver and just smash into everything, like basically what evolution has done? Or should we control it?
Why are you the driver?
Because we have the intelligence.
There's a requirement to justify supremacy, right? If we are having conversations about consent, to how, right? And lots of vegans make a claim of no human supremacy as a premise. I don't take it that you do based on what you've said here. Right?
Well, I think
but like, if for you to be the bus driver, that you have to have a justification for saying, like, we are taking the reins and that should be done. And so there is a claim of supremacy and subjugation in my mind at play there, if we can accept that some animals are sentient, or at least that, like, they are, right, like, they are in this consequential.
Okay, well, like, look at it this way. So I just kind of see animals as basically stupid or retarded humans, basically. I mean, we all come from the same DNA. We're basically the same. So if you had a bunch of retarded people, like, in a room killing each other, shouldn't you step in and stop them, or should you just, oh, that's cute. Okay. Just let it go. Oh, well, I can't violate their consent. I just got to let them, kill each other.
As I mentioned earlier, these people were all carnists. They are fine with torturing animals unnecessarily to feed themselves. So of course they're going to reject the logical evidence that humans and non-humans are basically sharing the exact same life experiences.
It feels like as we're sort of progressing, I'm getting this perception of antinatalism as the ultimate anti-consent, you are basically putting this divine stature to your ideals and enforcing them at all costs, because you're saying the end goal is to have no life.
Well, first I want to say that not all antinatalists believe that. Some antinatalists are purely human-centered, and they just think it's a very passive philosophy. Just don't have kids.
Right. Right.
But I think if you are an antinatalist, you have to consider the animals, in my opinion.
Should we just not imprison criminals because that would violate their consent to be free? Should we not euthanize an animal with half of its face missing to end its terrible suffering? So he's just trying to make a dishonest claim that antinatalism is playing God, when it's procreation that is doing so. The moderator asked us to speculate on how the world will end. This basically got into a mix of science fiction and doomsday scenarios, so it wasn't really on subject, but sort of interesting to talk about. I tend to side with Derived Energy, who foresaw nanotechnology and genetically modified viruses as taking us out in the next few hundred years. Someone asked me a question that I hadn't heard before, and that was, what is my opinion of the World Seed Bank in Svalbard, the Arctic island where Jaiwan Huang lived for a time?
What's everybody's feeling on the seed vault?
I think that's
a good idea.
Really get you going?
I think it's great to preserve those seeds just in case you might need them someday. I mean that
That makes no sense.
Well, plants don't experience pain, so
yeah, it's no harm in having those seeds. I mean, when the human race comes back, you want to.
So won't we prepare for the antinatalist Armageddon and have pods of embryos that have a lamb uterus
you want civilization. I mean, basically that's the idea of civilization gets wiped out. I mean, you want to bring civilization back, and you want to feed people and stuff. You don't want them to suffer. So.
Wait, but then isn't it the whole goal of bringing these things back to our benefit? Then you don't want them to bring back their benefit.
I mean,
so that we
get
can
what you're saying. You don't want the population to blow up again, but
what?
I
But
think
you might as well
you
use
can be
existence for the
against
people that still have to be here.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Like if nuclear warfare or whatever break out, right? Like, yeah, like yes, we may not want overpopulation to swell and all of that, but you do. If civilization got totally wiped out, like no one could find food or anything like that, like it feels wrong to let those people die, right? So you want something to, again, like, right, it's not, the whole point is not just like to exit, it's to gracefully exit and to ease towards the end of a civilization rather than just have people, crawling over the finish line and suffering till the very end.
He for some reason thought I'd be against it because I would want the human race to starve to death. But as you heard, someone reminded him that we want the human race to have a graceful exit, not a sloppy exit. The moderator had one more question on his worksheet from Emil Saran, which basically said to just get over yourself, but it led to one person saying this.
It doesn't take much to kill yourself.
It does.
Sure.
It does. It takes a lot of courage. Yeah.
It takes more than you think.
Your body's own self-preservation.
Right. It's rebelling against you. Yeah.
That's fair.
And also, we didn't discuss this really, but Benatar in his book, Bear Never to a Ben, which I saw somebody had it here. He talked. A big part of that is the optimism bias that humans have. They're biased to see things as having rose-colored glasses. You know, they think everything is better than it really is, and that's one reason why they don't kill themselves or become antinatalists.
I was about to bring up the opposite bias.
Yeah, people are way more
Pessimism
focused
bias?
on the negative because
Right,
you
like-
only die once, so we're like wired to pay attention to the bad a lot more than the good.
Yeah.
I don't think that's
Like, there's a reason
Yeah,
clickbait
like a lot,
news and
yeah.
stuff focuses on negative, because that's what gets people's attention and memory and
Like-
focus.
This is, of course, coming from someone who has not read Benatar and doesn't understand that the optimism bias has been proven to exist in humans and in animals. What I should have done was poll the room. Show of hands. How many of you think you're going to get cancer and the cancer wins? I'd be surprised if any of them would have raised their hands, though the odds are that 1 out of 3 of them will indeed die that way. So they just use anecdotal evidence saying, oh, my friends are pessimists, or that the news seems to be pessimistic. You've all heard the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads in the news business. It's a business, and nobody wants to hear about what the most ethical humans did today. And they want to hear about what the worst humans and the most disgusting acts were. Just because many of us have morbid curiosity and like to engage in social pornography, it doesn't translate into being a philosophical pessimist. All the optimism bias means is that you don't think the worst things will happen to you. If people truly were pessimists like me, then they couldn't stand to watch the nightly news because the horror is just too real. And that's why I don't watch it anymore. It's because of their optimism bias that they get entertained by that shit. Because that will never happen to me or my kid. So I hope this video provided some food for thought. The experience did for me. One of the students came up to me and said sorry for counter-arguing so often, but his questions in particular were not offensive, and they can only help me strengthen my arguments. He also said that he will not reproduce, so that was great to hear. Only some of the glib comments irritated me, and I mentioned those. I've been researching and writing about this subject for years, and since for most of them this was their first time hearing about it, I thought they did okay. I was glad that there are so many young people there, because that's really antinatalism's target audience. If just one of them decides to find another hobby than reproduction, it would have been well worth it. I'd like to thank Barry Belmont and the U of M Bioethics Discussion Group for having me, and my fellow antinatalists from out of state for being there as well. As always, thanks for listening, and don't have kids.
We can't live this way. Feel me slowly fade away. Feel me slowly fade away. As far as the wind will take me. Every day I feel tired.